Greetings from Victoria. My name is Garnet Schulhauser, and I am a Level 2 QHHT practitioner, which is short for Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique, which is a hypnosis modality developed and perfected over a number of years by the late great Dolores Cannon. Now, in a QHHT session, the client is hypnotically induced into a very deep trance state called the theta level. There are two parts to a QHHT trance. The first part is a past life regression, and the second part is direct contact with the client's higher self to get the answers to the questions that the client brings with them to the session. Now, if you'd like more information about QHHT and what it might do for you, please visit my website, which is garnetschulhauserqhht.com. Now, before we get into the serious topic of today, I'd like to relate to you a funny story I heard recently. It seems that one day a housework-challenged husband decided to wash his own sweatshirt. So he marches into the laundry room, and then he yells at his wife, who's in the kitchen, "What settings do I put on the washing machine for my sweatshirt?" And his wife yelled back, "What does the shirt say?" And the husband responded, "It says University of Oklahoma." Now, as I mentioned, the first part of a QHHT session is a past life regression. Now, it can be a regression to a past life, to a parallel life, or even a future life. Quite commonly, it's a past life as a human on Earth, but I've had past lives where people have been animals on planet Earth, or even alien life forms on other planets. In any event, the past life chosen for a client is chosen for them by their higher self. And the higher self usually has some valid reason for taking the client to this particular past life. It may be that there is someone that played an important part in that past life who's also an important player in their current life. Sometimes the past life will demonstrate that there is some unfinished karma in that life, a lesson not learned, a challenge that wasn't overcome, that is spilled forward into the client's current life, and that helps the client to understand why they are facing the struggles they are facing in their current life, because they basically originated from a past life. Now, most of the past lives I've encountered are fairly ordinary and mundane past lives as humans on Earth, where nothing unusual or special happens. Occasionally, though, there is a past life that has something unusual twist to it, or something unexpected that happens, and that's why I try to relay some of these past lives in these videos that I'm giving on the QHHT past lives. Now, you should know that in the past life, the client is actually reliving parts of that past life, and sometimes they can become very emotional. They often will have tears streaming down their cheeks. These tears can be tears of joy because it's their wedding day or the birth of a child, or maybe tears of grief because a loved one has passed away. It's all very real for the client when they're in this past life regression. Now, today I'd like to talk about a session that I had with a lady named Patricia, which is not her real name. Anyway, she went into a deep trance very easily, and when she came off the cloud, she found herself standing in a village square near a well. She guessed that she was in her mid-teens. She was wearing a long blue tunic with sandals on her feet, and her long brown hair was braided and covered up with a headscarf. She couldn't tell exactly where she was. She assumed because of the temperature that it was somewhere in the Middle East, and it was many years ago, but she couldn't nail down a specific date. So she's waiting by this well, waiting her turn, and when she gets to the well, she dips her bucket in the water and fills it up, and then makes her way back slowly towards her home. Her home was a small stone and mud brick structure, and she lived there with her parents and her younger sister. She said that at that time she was not yet married, but she expected that within a short period of time her parents would arrange for her to be married to one of the men in the village. So when I moved her forward to an important day, she became very emotional. And she was weeping, and she said that she was sitting beside her husband, who was laying on a mat, and he was obviously dying. He had difficulty breathing. She didn't know what he had, but likely it was something like tuberculosis. So she's there watching her husband slowly pass away, and then she watched as he took his last breath, and she was really quite distraught. She'd only been married for a short period of time, and they did not yet have any children. So I moved her away from that scene and moved her to another important day. Unfortunately, this other important day was not any better than the one she had just left. She found herself being escorted from her village to the outskirts of the village, along with a man named Joshua. And what had happened was that a couple of years after her husband had died, Joshua managed to charm her, and they ended up having sex, and they were caught by Joshua's wife. Well, they were convicted of adultery and sentenced to death by stoning. So Patricia was quite horrified at this prospect, but there was little that she could do. So the two of them, Patricia and Joshua, were escorted to the edge of the village where there were two man-sized holes cut into the ground. They were each placed into one of these holes with their hands tied behind their backs, and then they were covered with dirt up to her shoulders in Patricia's case, and up to his waist in Joshua's case. They could see to their horror that in front of them was a pile of rocks and stones. She said that it looked like most of the stones were about the size of a baseball, but some of them were larger and some of them were slightly smaller. Many of the villagers had gathered in front of this rock pile and were waiting for the go-ahead to go ahead and start chucking the stones and the rocks at these two people. As the first rock was making its way towards Patricia, she left her body. So she was not in her body when the rock impacted her forehead, and she didn't feel anything. And she was floating above the scene like a detached observer, even though it was her body that was being pummeled by these rocks. Well, eventually enough rocks hit her that her body expired. And Patricia sort of said goodbye to her body and then floated up towards the bright light in the sky, guided by one of her spirit guides. She acknowledged that this was a very horrible way to die, but she was very grateful that she was able to leave her body before the first rock struck her head, and so she didn't feel any pain or discomfort, and all she could do was just watch her body struggle as it took its last breath. When Patricia came out of the trance, she was very happy that she was in her current life and that she doesn't have to endure that kind of a punishment in her current life, because in the modern Western world, as we all know, stoning to death is not an appropriate or a punishment that can happen here, although I understand that it does still happen in some countries in the world. And then, as we were discussing Patricia's past life after she came out of the trance, a light bulb went on and she said, "Hey, I now realize that Joshua, the man I committed adultery with and who was stoned to death with me, was her husband in her current life." I want to assure people that this kind of horrible death that Patricia experienced in this past life is quite uncommon. Most of the time, my clients have a very peaceful, natural death in their past life regression. So do not be concerned that you may run into this. This is quite unusual. But the good news is, as I mentioned, Patricia said that she actually left her body before the first rock struck, and so she did not really experience an agonizing death from all the rocks hitting her head. Well, that's all for today, folks. I ask you to kindly try to enjoy your journey on Earth, and above all, remember to keep on dancing.